All right. I've been promising a full rundown of the gravel bike conversion for a long time. There's a couple of these up on the channel, and they're sort of incremental. The bike in process as it's gotten to what I'm going to, well, its current form. I don't know if it's its final form, but its current form. So I thought it was probably worthwhile to go through some of those and some of the choices and some of the decisions and some of the setups and why I did what and how I did things and what I did and what you might do if you're going to try to do a conversion like this. So here, let's run it through. Here's the bike as it hangs at this exact moment. So pretty similar. This is a 90, I think it's a 93 Bridgestone MB3 frame and fork. I've had these since new. These were my high school mountain bike. And over the last, I don't know, year or so, I've done a bit of a conversion to it to turn it into something like a gravel bike or an adventure bike or an all-road bike or whatever it is that we're calling these. I am not racing this. It's not for that. This is my, I'm just, I don't know, mixed surface ride bike. I don't know, whatever. So here's where we're at. So I've had a couple of people say that this frame is too small to for me. It's really not. So the frame is, it's a Bridgestone of this era. They were measured in centimeters, unlike every other mountain bike in the world that was measured in inches. So this frame is like a 20.5, but that's not the most pertinent detail here. If you're going to do a conversion like this, I would argue that the distance from the bottom bracket to, the seat cluster is not your primary concern. Rather, you should be thinking mostly about the distance from the seat post to the head tube, the top tube length. And I realize that these days, reach and stack are very voguey to talk about for fit, but for this, I'm just going to talk about top tube length. So this bike is it's basically like a 20.5 for a mountain bike, but if you measure the top tube on this bike, it is 50, it's a horizontal top tube. I know it looks like it's angling down, it's because the bike's hanging kind of funny. This top tube, center to center, is 59 centimeters, which is almost exactly the same top tube length as my road bike. So with a reasonable stem on the bike, this thing has the exact same top tube length and ultimately the same reach as my road bike. So yeah, there's a little bit of seat post showing. Yeah, there's some rise on the stem. There's a bunch of reasons for that. And, but it is in fact the right size. If I had gone up a size, the top tube would have been extremely long and I would have been in very stubby stem length era. Also, I had this. So let's talk first about like some of the basic stuff that I've done to the bike, and then we'll get into some more sort of like details and why I did what I did. First thing, we'll start at the front end. I had to get a new stem, and I had to get, obviously, drop handlebars, right? The bike was built with flat handlebars in mind. I had originally started with a much lower rise stem, something with a lot less quill exposed here. But the head tube on these bikes is extremely short. The front end of the bike, the stack on the bike is very, very, very low. So this was necessary to get, I still have what most people would call a significant drop from saddle to handlebar. It's less than it looks here, again, because the bike is, this top tube should be horizontal. Yeah, I had to get the front end up, and I needed to shorten it from the mountain bike stems that it came with. It comes from an era where you were having like 135 millimeter stems on the front of these things. So this is, I think, a 110, I think. Handlebars are salsa cow chippers, maybe? They're aluminum. They are 31/8 clamp, and they are 46 centimeters wide, the widest drop bars I've ever ridden. I realize that right now that those are not especially wide, historically speaking, for what's in vogue right now, but for someone who's been riding 42s their entire life on a road bike, 46 feels immense. The stem is not a salsa. It's also not a taco. This is a Velo orange 1-inch quill stem, 31/8 removable faceplate, welded steel stem. It is, I think, a fairly decent stand-in for a salsa. I like it a lot. It's a delightful stem. You should know that when this bike was first built, it was built with a whole bunch of bin parts. Like I just dug around in my bins of stuff, which are substantial, and put a lot of the bike together based on that. This is not the original handlebars. This is not the original stem that I did when I first built it. This is the setup that fits me now. What I didn't have at the time was a set of drifters. Now, I know there's a load of people out there that do these, that do them with bar end conversions, and that's fine. If you like those, they're entirely a reasonable choice to use for this sort of stuff, but I hate, with the fire of 1,000 suns, bar-on shifters. I don't like them very much. And so I hunted down a set of drifters, STI levers. These happen to be 8-speed Dura-Ace, okay? And because I got a very decent deal on these, and because they're Dura-Ace and they're lovely, and I have no complaints with them, but because these are 8-speed, that dictated my drivetrain, right? 8 speeds here means I'm going to have 8-speed here. These wheels are compatible with at least 10-speed, but this determined that. So there you go on that front. When I did the stem swap, one of the other things that needed to get done this bike from a maintenance perspective was the bike had its original headset, which was not a very good headset. And so I eventually tracked down a 1-inch all-black Chris King grip nut, which is the headset that you want. If you're looking for a headset, you probably want one of these. They're impossible to find. King doesn't make any threaded headsets anymore, so everything is eBay, and the prices have gone berserk. This one is grip nut. I would have preferred a tune-up setup, but because I got grip nut, which is fine, but it means you can't put a sandwich spacer in here to hold your front brake cable, which means I had to shell out for one of these jams. There are lesser versions of this, but I got the Paul one because it's Paul. And now I have a black bar, black stem, brake cable stopper, and a all black King headset, which I think is pretty fetching. Entirely over the top, but it's the good stuff. When I first built the bike, I had a set of linear pull V-brakes on there, and I should point out, because everybody asks, how'd you get those to work with that? You don't. They don't work with that. These are short pull brake levers, like every other classic road lever that exists. And so they are basically incompatible with V-brakes. So I put a decent set of cantilevers on here. I will point out that these newer school cantilevers, these are just like Tektro something or others, totally delightful. And they've got the same threaded, slotted posts that V-brakes use. So unlike the old days of setting up cantilevers, which was just a dark art of horror, these are actually pretty easy to set up. You get your cable angles set up here, you get your pads. It's just, they're not that bad. So you do it. They work great. They provide more than sufficient power. The front fender I get asked about occasionally. Yeah, it's bobbed. So this fender here, which is a Planet bike, not my favorite, but you run what you brung. 26-inch fenders are harder to get, and I needed width. Anyway, Planet bike here was supposed to go through the fork crown and come out to, I don't know, like here-ish, which would have gotten me more coverage. But the fork crown on this bike with the tire that I'm using is not exactly spacious, and it was difficult. I had to cut away quite a lot of the fender to get that. And the rattling just sort of eventually got to me. So front fender's off, or bobbed anyway. And it works pretty okay as it is. I tend not to ride a lot in super crappy conditions, but this sort of works. Front wheel and tire. Front wheel is a Mavic Crossmax UST. It's the original generation of UST compatible Crossmax. Not the original Crossmax, the original generation of UST Crossmax. They are 18 spokes. They are alloy spokes. They have ceramic sidewalls. These tires, which are Panaracer Gravel King SKs 26x21s, are that's a 53 if you're metric, are set up tubeless on this bike. Between the ceramic sidewalls and the brake pads and the brakes, this bike has plenty of stopping power for me. Moving towards the I would fully recommend these tires. I don't know if you want to bother hunting down a set of hot boy wheels like this from back in the day. Wheel choices, there's a lot of very good wheel choices out there, but I needed rim brake, tubeless was a benefit, and light and serviceable and all the rest. So these were a decent deal. The tires, fantastic. Far more grip on trails than I would have expected given their tread pattern that's on them, and they roll better on the street. I seem to run them around 25 or maybe 30 PSI. It seems to work for me. I've got quite a few miles on them, and they're not too worn down either, which I'm pleased with. So that's good. Moving towards the back. King cages, stainless. It's really the only water bottle cage I think you should pretty much ever be buying. So there you go. If you're full-blown baller, you get them in tie. If you're not, you get them in stainless steel, and they last forever and ever and ever, and they look good. Frame pump on the back, because always a frame pump. New saddle that is a Physique Aliante saddle, which is pretty comfy. I'm not sure if I'd like it more than a flight, but I still dig it quite a lot. That is a same problem on the back rear brake. That is a homemade custom brake stop, a cable stop. It is that's a piece of 2mm stainless steel bicycle spoke. That is a chainring bolt that has been drilled out to fit the ferrule of this and brass brazed together. That's it. Simple, light. There's no barrel adjuster on there, which would have been nice, but I mean, come on, right? Okay. Crankset is the most wonderfully overkill, stupid thing on this entire bike. That is a Raceface North Shore DH forged crankset. This was, at the time, the most hurly-burly crankset that you could get from Raceface. I originally had this on what was effectively a downhill bike, and yeah, it's super, super stout. It's so much stiffer than the regular crankset that I can actually feel the difference. It is, unfortunately, it's got a Raceface signature DH bottom bracket back in here, which is a lovely bottom bracket, no complaints there, but it is the unfortunately named ISIS standard. If you don't know ISIS standard bottom brackets, they were an open standard bottom bracket, large diameter spindle with flutes on the end of it, so a splined bottom bracket, and they were great, except for the fact that they made the spindle so big and the bearings are internal to the bottom bracket shell that there isn't really enough room for the bearing size that you'd want to be able to handle the loads. So they tend to eat bearings. Not my favorite, but again, had the crankset. What I did do, so here's my thinking, right? For the gearing on this bike, I needed a fairly wide set. This bike was originally built to do a pretty long, very hilly ride. And I needed some low-end gearing. So 1x was not going to be an option for me without basically an entirely new drivetrain, right? But what I realized is that this crankset is the old mountain bike standard bolt pattern. It's not 4x104, it's 5x94. And while 4x104 has a minimum chainring size, effectively, of a 32, 5x94 has a minimum chainring size of a 29. So 29 on the middle position of this. It's a triple crankset. I'm only using the two outer positions. So in the middle, I got a 29. On the outer, I got a 46. Yeah, that's a big spread. Yeah, the original derailleur for this bike handles that spread. I would not call the shifting speedy, but it does shift reliably. So that's good enough for me. 46 is probably maybe a little bit more than I need for some of the stuff, but I had a 44 previously, and I found myself in a fairly small cog often when riding, and I thought if I went up 2 teeth in the front, I would get a better regular chain line for cruising on the road, and I could still do a 29 and get my bailout on the back. So that's what I did. XTR, maybe an M950 9-speed derailleur, one of my favorite derailleurs of all time. hooked up with probably an XT cassette, could be XTR, you never know with me. That is an 1132. So my bailout gear here is a 29 by 32, and my top end gear is a 4611. That's a lot of range. Again, 8-speed on the back is determined by the drifters on there. What else on the back of the bike? It still has a full fender wrapped around it. Could use a little bit more adjustment, I suppose, but it works pretty well. Same brake on the back as I've got on the front, which again works pretty well. I got a handmade seat bag, which I'll probably do a revision on. That's got a tube and multi-tool and tire lever and that sort of thing in there. It's a Calloy seat post. It's a copy of a Nito. I like it because it's a one-piece, so the seat post shaft here bends up here. It's not, the ones with the joint fail for me eventually, and that irritates me. What else? SRAM 8-speed chain. So yeah, I get asked a ton about this bike. It's been a wonderful project. At this point, I would say it's done. That is to say, other than getting the rear wheel to more reliably hold air than it currently is, and, you know, potentially different pedals, and then eventual stuff that's going to happen, like that bottom bracket's going to fail, like the bearings in it are going to fail, and that sort of thing. Other than sort of like maintenance-y stuff like that, this bike feels really, really, really good. It's a delight to ride. People ask about like, oh, why didn't you go 650B with it? Why didn't you convert it? A bunch of reasons. If you go 650B, you raise the bottom bracket of the bike a whole bunch, and that sucks for handling. And the bottom bracket on these bikes is already pretty high because they're a mountain bike, so they're trying to get the pedals up out of the roots. And so if you put 650Bs on it, you get a very tall bottom bracket height, and that affects your stability, especially when you're cruising on the road. It's not really what you want. Also, if you go 650 on a bike like this, you give up a bunch of tire clearance, right? Because you're pushing the tire further up into the chainstays. And so I would lose a bunch of tire clearance, which I'm not particularly interested in doing. I got to reposition brakes, so you end up running weird brake sets to get the pads high enough to get to the rim. I got to build whole new wheels, and on top of it, like, if the frame was disc brake compatible and the clearances worked, yeah, maybe that goes. But this bike is old enough, like, there's no disc brakes on here. There's not a ton of tire clearance in the first place. I'm running 53s, which is awesome because I tend to ride kind of chunky stuff. And if I went to 650Bs on a bike like this, I'd have to probably step down to, like, I mean, upper 30s maybe? Maybe you squeeze into the low 40s, but you're not running big fatty fat tires on it anymore. And that seems a lot to give up for me. Yeah, so the disadvantages outweighed the advantages for me. So I'm sticking with 26s. I think they're entirely viable wheel size, and I'm not a proponent of modifying frames like this for that. I know people have put disc brake tabs on these things. I think it's a bad idea, generally speaking. I would much rather, if you're going to invest that sort of time and effort and money, I think you're probably better off just buying a modern setup, right? Just don't muck with the vintage. Just go with the modern and be done with it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, so 26s for life. And yeah, you should totally buy that stem. That stem, I would take a quill stem like this. I would take a quill stem like this over a quill adapter that turns it into a threadless setup. You know, you've seen those. They drop in, right? And then they got a little stub, and you put your threadless stem on there. And then more adapters is more trouble. It's more points of failure. It's more complication. I think this is a cleaner, more classic setup. And you're thinking, oh, but I want to run a lightweight threadless stem. I mean, okay, but you're building a vintage mountain bike into a gravel bike. I don't know how much weight should be your priority here. Besides, steel stems are dope, and then you can get these cool stickers that say tacos on them, and that's funny, and you should totally do that. All right. And it lets you run a modern handlebar with a 31.8, and that's rad. So you can run like whatever dope like carbon bar you want and make up all the weight difference, I suppose. But anywho, that's what I did. If in retrospect, things I might do different. 10 speed would have been rad here. 10 speed here, 10 speed there, still a double would have been super duper duper sweet, because I could have run a nice fat cog stack, like a, I don't know, like a 1136 or an 1142 on the back here at 10 speed, not had the jumps be crazy, right? An 1136, the jumps between the cogs in the back are pretty similar to this, so that would have been rad. And would have gotten me more gears and a clutch on the derailleur and a few other things that would have been cool. But that's a whole bunch of money, and drivetrains wear out. It's a thing they do if you use them. So someday these will die on me, and someday that, you know what I mean? So that's okay. That can wait until next time. And if I had thought it all the way through from the get-go, I might have gone 10 speed, but I was trying to do it on a bit of a budget, so I got a good deal on the 8-speed stuff, and that's enough. It's pretty okay, man. 8-speed is not bad. I think anything north of 7. 7's hard to justify. 7 is a different cassette body. It's like it's shorter. So a wheel set that is 7 specific, you can't put 8 on. You can put obviously you can put a 7 on an 8-speed, but you can't put an 8-speed on a 7. So I think if your wheels are at least 8-speed, that gets you access to nearly the fully modern setup on there. Yeah, there's my setup. That's where it is right now. It is awesome in every way. Aesthetically, yes, I realize that I have a silver seat post and a black stem, but that is not high enough on my priority list to justify the expense of changing it. Too many other projects. All right, there we are. Current bike check, conversion talk, why I did, what I did, full rundown of the bike as it is right now. Good luck with yours. Feel free to ask questions. I'll talk to you later.